The AMG GT R frequently ranked at the top of the depreciation leaderboard. However, used car values shifted into a new paradigm during the last few years, and the AMG GT R utilized this shift to the fullest. Values are exceptionally strong, and perhaps even, dare I say it, stronger than its Porsche counterpart. In this video you'll find out by how much values increased in the AMG GT R market and how it compares to other cars like the Porsche GT3, Turbo, Audi R8 and McLaren 570S. But let's have a look at today's market before we dive into the details. Over here we have the US AMG GT R market, and you can see that I split the market by the model type. We have the S, the C, the Base, the R and of course the famous Black Series. Now when it comes to pricing, the Black Series is in a different league. The other models are priced much closer to each other and show a decent amount of overlap. Yet, the R model is the most expensive when we leave out the Black Series, and since this video is about the R model, let's zoom into that market. Over here we have that R market split by roof type and the Base and the Pro model. In total there are only 74 cars for sale, and you can see that the normal GTR has the largest market share. Prices start in the high 40s but stretch up to $250,000 for a fresh example. Interestingly, the price difference between the basic and the Pro version is a bit smaller than the MSRP difference. Also, if you have watched my previous AMG GT R videos, you'll notice that the price difference between the model years is much smaller. So the market is more compressed. A base 2018 model will set you back $170,000, a 2019 $182,000 and a 2020 model $204,000. Roadsters are slightly more expensive at $220,000 and are also a lot more rare. There are only 13 for sale. Yet, supply for the Pro model is even lower with only 2 cars. So we are now up to date on today's market, and that means that it's time to have a look at the value development over time. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, GTRs are not known for their strong residuals. On the contrary, they often ranked at the top of the depreciation leaderboard. The initial drop from MSRP was simply very high. However, we can see now that after this drop, they fully exploited the upward momentum in the used car market. Perhaps we can even say that they were undervalued prior to the surge in used car prices and that this price increase is justified. Let's have a look at the value development. Over here we can see the median prices for the used Roadsters and the Coupes, and this only includes the base models, so the Pro versions are not included. If we start at the top with the Roadster, we can see that prices increased by 11%, and that's not a spectacular increase at all. It's a bit disappointing to be honest. However, we need to be careful with interpreting this trend. You can see that the shaded area is very large and this area shows the uncertainty in the prices. The Roadster market is very small and as a consequence the uncertainty in the pricing is very large. I would therefore like to focus on the Coupe market. Look at that. Prices soared and you can see that the price increase is almost linear. On March 2020 they had a median price of $141,500, while you need to bring around $180,000 to buy one in today's market. That's an increase of $38,500 or 27.1%. So that's not a bad result at all, especially if you consider that the median mileage in the beginning of the period was 3.3 thousand miles, but that it currently sits at 9.2 thousand miles. We can also see that the uncertainty in the pricing reduced massively during the last 2 years. The main reason for this is that the used cars with only a few miles took their first depreciation hit, while prices for the older used cars increased. Hence, the price variation in the market decreased. Interestingly though, supply increased quite a lot during the last period. It went up from 27 to 58 cars. With a median price of $180,000, the cars are then also close to their original MSRP. So I guess it's very tempting to put your car up for sale and try to sell it with a minimum loss. A 10% value loss from a $200,000 MSRP is not bad, considering that you had the car for 2 years and added around 9,000 miles. Now these cars over here lost a lot of value from new, but you can see that a large part of this initial drop is now recovered. You by the way don't see the initial drop over here because we are looking at the used cars only. Yet, if you look a bit deeper into the data you will see that a significant part of the price increase happened during the last year. The price increase in the first period is partially the result of a change in market composition. So what about the Pro model then? Well, unfortunately, we have the same problem over there as that we have in the Roadster market. The market size is too small to say anything meaningful about the price development. There have been less than 8 cars for sale. Now after all those numbers we know that prices increased with 27%, but we don't really know if this value is high or low, as we don't have anything to compare it to. So let's solve that. From the video's title you probably figured that the increase rate is pretty decent. We know, for example, that Porsche residuals are always strong, especially for GT cars. But did the AMG GT R perform even better? We will have a look at that shortly. Let's first compare the price trend to the one for the Audi R8 and the McLaren 570S. Over here we have the price trend for the AMG GT R in blue, the one for the V10 Pluses in green and the one for the base models in orange. And these are the pre-facelifted cars of the second generation. AMG GT R prices increased by 27.1%. We already saw that. Now looking at the R8 market, we can see that prices increased by 25.5% for the base model and by 24.4% for the Plus model. So yes, the AMG GT R increased marginally more, but the difference is so small that we can't really say that the GT R outperformed the R8. However, I still think that this is an excellent result for a car that used to rank at the top of the depreciation leaderboard. I didn't expect such a large increase before I looked into the data. But is it still good when we compare it to the brand from England? Let's have a look. Over here we have the AMG GT R in orange and the 570S in blue. Before looking at the price trends, have a look at the price points. Look how similar they are. They're basically identical. But now then, 570S prices increased by 17.5%, and this is a lot lower than the 27% in the GTR market. Yes, the time period is slightly shorter, but not enough to count for this big of a difference in the price increase. So again, the GTR scores very well. Now against a McLaren that is perhaps not such a big surprise. But what happens when we compare this car against the Porsches? Over here we have now in red the GTR and in blue, green and orange some Porsche models. It's a bit messy, but please stay with me here. All the Porsches are from the 9 and 1.2 generation, and you can see that we have the Turbo S, the normal turbo and the GT3. The latter, by the way, excludes the Touring models. So how does it look for the GTR? Well, excellent. In the exact same period as the GTR, turbo prices went up by 22% in the base market and by 15% in the S market. Looking at the GT3 market, we can see that prices increased by 24.5%. So if we look at these results, we can see that the AMG GT R did extremely well. Prices increased more than in the turbo market and approximately the same as in the GT3 market. The time period is slightly different over there, so I think it is fair to call it a draw. Now what makes this comparison especially interesting is that the mileage increases in the markets are approximately the same, and also the median model years are the same. So the comparison should give a fairly accurate picture. There is one thing though where the GT3 clearly wins the value game, and that's the supply levels. Compared to last year, supply increased in the GTR market and also marginally in the turbo market. Supply in the GT3 market moved in the opposite direction, as it is down by quite a bit, and this in turn might influence future prices. And on that note, let's wrap up and conclude. Depreciation on the AMG GT R was very high before the used car prices soared. Yet, things have changed now and a lot of the lost ground was made up. Moreover, the value increase is larger than what we saw in the turbo market and on par with what we can see in the GT3 market. And that is just an excellent result. Porsche GT cars have a solid reputation when it comes to residuals. And also compared to cars like the Audi R8 V10 and McLaren 570S, the GTR performed excellent. Now if you looked at some of my previous videos, you might notice a pattern here. Some cars that saw very large price decreases prior to this large increase in the used car market are now performing very well. They're making up a lot of lost ground. Think about the Audi R8 V10 and various McLaren models. And as we saw in this video, the AMG GT R. Now the big question is of course, what will happen with the prices for these cars when things normalize? Will they see a second big drop or will values stay where they are? I think that they might be the riskier bet compared to the Porsche GT family. And with that we arrived at the end of this video. Now if you enjoyed this data-driven way of analyzing car values but would have liked to see the analysis for a different car, comment down below with the name of the car for which you would like to see an analysis. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I will make a video about it. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please support the channel by clicking on the like button down below. Thank you. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you next week for a new video.